Yeah, so let's talk about the structure of Genesis chapter 3. So where did we see kind of the first section end here, chapter 3? How about the group in the back? Where did you guys have your first section end?
1 to 5.
1 to 5?
Yeah.
Okay. What about any other groups? Similar, different?
1 to 5.
1 to 5, okay. And how did you guys try to summarize the kind of section of 1 to 5?
Second is trying to deceive.
All right. Satan seeking to deceive the woman. And just how is he trying to deceive the woman?
Tempting.
Yep, tempting her with what? Like what's kind of his line of attack?
Did he really say this?
Mm-hmm.
Like questioning.
Yeah,
Questioning God, I guess.
yeah, to doubt God, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. All right, so then what about verse 6? Where does that section go?
Said 6 and 7 is the result of disobedience.
Would you guys agree with that? 6, 7? All right, yep. So, human disobedience. Is there a certain way you guys tried to summarize this section?
It gave into temptation and felt shame.
I like that. I think drawing that shame bit's really important. Yeah. All right. So what about then verses 8? Where does that section kind of go to?
We put 8 through 10.
Okay. What?
God is walking in the garden and searching, and they are hiding.
Yep. Okay. And then what would be your section after that?
11 to 13. God questioned them, and woman blamed the serpent.
Yeah. I wonder, since it's kind of a back and forth conversation between God and them, I wonder if maybe just keeping that conversation together as a section, like as we're breaking up, might just help us kind of have a. I know, it's like, I mean, you can go back and forth. It's not bad, but sometimes I find it gets a little easier when we look at the overall structure if we have a little bit less sections. So let's do 3:8 through 13 together. And so yeah, so you guys said God searches. For them, but they blame shift, right? You said blame shift?
Yeah, confrontation and excuses.
Yeah. All right, so the blame shift, they hide, they come up with excuses, right? Which is so sad. I remember chatting with my kids about it. I'm like, what should they have done? Like, they just should have said, we're sorry, we messed up. I'm like, you're right. The story would have turned out so much better. Hint, hint, that's what you girls could do when you're caught in sin. I mean, to my kids, they're girls. Right? And it's like, and I'm like, but we all struggle with that too, don't we? Okay, but does God come looking for them because he can't find them or he's not sure what's going on? No. So what do we learn about God that he even comes looking for them?
How much he cares for them.
How much he cares, yeah. Yeah, that's worth really noting, you know.
I feel like I missed that until you just asked that question.
Yeah. Yeah, and see, then this goes back to our principle, right? But asking questions, right? And think of this, oh, why does God come looking for them? Yep. Because he cares, right? Yeah. All right, so then,
It does seem like it was an ongoing encounter that he was having.
yeah. Yeah, this isn't like it's the only time he was walking with them, right? Simply that was the norm, was for them to walk and talk with God, right? He probably took on some type of physical forms they could see, probably. You know? Yeah. And then they're, you know, and then so now he comes back again, but this time it's different, right? It's not because God's changed, it's because people have changed, right?
Well, he asked the question, but he knows where they were.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I explained to my girls the other day because we were just reading through this like a couple nights ago. I'm like, we kind of help watch like a toddler like one day a week. And I'm like, when you play hide and seek with her, like when you ask like, where are you? And you check like 5 other spots before you find her, is it because you don't know where she is? I'm like, no, we know where she is right away. She's a toddler, she can't hide that well, right? But it's like part of like the loving relationship, right? So, all right, so Satan seeks to deceive, they disobey, God searches for them, they blame shift. All right, so what's going to happen next in the story? You can kind of feel the tension ratcheting, right? You got, are they going to fall in the sins? And they do. What's going to happen now? Well, they hide, right? What's going to happen now that God's caught them and they've been blame shifting? So, what's the next section? 14 and 15 together? Okay. Yep. And then what would be the section after that? 16 to 19?
Yeah, 16 would be punishment of the woman,
Yep.
and 17 and 19 is punishment of Adam.
All right. So the serpent is 14 to 15.
16 alone
Oh, 16 alone. Okay.
is punishment of the woman.
And then 17.
17 and 19 is punishment of Adam.
All right. So how would we summarize the whole section as a whole here?
Consequences.
Consequence or sin? God gives consequences for sin. Okay. What's the consequence he gives the serpent? Let's just kind of dig here for a minute. Yep, he curses him.
Well, he
Yep.
says, cursed are you above all livestock, which says, at that point,
Yep.
he was considered livestock. And above all beasts of the field. Cursed are you above all. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life.
Yep.
It suggests that before that, he wasn't crawling on his belly. He was upright maybe, I don't know, but that
Yeah.
suggests that physically the serpent changed as part of the curse.
Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely a possibility. There's kind of probably 2 ways to take it. That's one of them. The other way is it could be more of like a symbolic expression, like you're now going to have this low position, right? Like your whole life now is going to be one of crawling on the dust, not necessarily literally, but like symbolically. It's kind of like when you say like, man, our team crushed the other team. We didn't literally crush them, but it's expression, right? And I think it probably goes back to like, which we didn't talk about at the very beginning, like who is the serpent? Right? Because I mean, if you're first reading Genesis, and imagine you've never read anything else in the Bible, like this serpent just seems to come out of nowhere, right? You're just like, everything's good, everything's good, everything's good. Serpent, tempting. Wait, what? Where'd the serpent come from, right? Now it's clear that God created him, right? He's not a different force from God that's like greater than God, right? He's a creation of God, right? But is this an actual talking snake? Is this Satan speaking through a talking snake? Or does Satan have some type of like serpent-like form, right? Those are all different possibilities. But obviously this is where I think like reading more in the Bible helps us interpret this section, right? Like we know from later in the Bible, the serpent is Satan, right? The first great kind of rebel, right? But it's possible like the word for serpent there could also be translated like bronze burning one. So it's possible that like it's talking about like Satan as an angel having some type of like appearance that Eve would have recognized as some type of angelic type being, and she's talking to him. And serpent's not how we should translate it at all. But either way, that's not really the most important thing. I just share that to kind of some interesting background. But the point is, whether he has to literally crawl on his belly as an animal now, or whether it's an expression, he's done. Like his rebellion is not going to win, right? In fact, not only does he have to crawl on his belly, so to speak, but what's the other judgment placed on him?
He and the woman will be at odds.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And their offspring
Yep.
will be at odds too.
Yep.
But he does say that the offspring will bruise his head,
Yep.
and the serpent will bruise his heel. And hitting the head is certainly more damaging than getting hit in the heel.
Yeah, right? So this one offspring of the woman will crush the serpent's head, defeat him utterly, right? So that's kind of his judgment. His little rebellion scheme that he's got going against God, it's going to utterly fail. And the one that's going to defeat him is actually a child from Eve's line. Pretty cool, right? So the very people he tried to use to turn against God, someone from that line will now come and defeat him, right? All right, what about the woman? What's kind of the judgment on her? Yeah. So pain in childbearing, and one other thing as well. Conflict. Relational conflict. Now, if you notice, this kind of pushes back against one of the two calls of humanity, right? To be fruitful and multiply. Suddenly that got a lot harder, because you got relational conflict and you've got pain in childbearing. So this whole be fruitful and multiply thing is now going to be a lot harder. That's one of the consequences. What about the consequences for Adam?
The ground is cursed,
Mm-hmm.
and in pain you shall eat it all the days of your life. So instead of being like the garden where everything grew well,
Yep.
beautiful, it's going to be a struggle now.
Yep.
How long?
Yes. So, which that pushes back into the second thing humanity is called to do, right? We are called to be stewards of the world, to rule over creation, to tend the garden. That just got a lot harder, right? So you can see the curses are directly related to what we are called to do. And in rebelling against God and cutting ourselves off from him, the things we're called to do to image him just got a lot harder, because we're doing them apart from him, right? So the consequences, kind of, so to speak, fit the crime, right? And then death, of course, right? Just as God told him, like, this is what happens. If you rebel against me and you cut yourself off from me as the source of life, you're going to die, right? So we've got Satan seeks to tempt them. We fall for it. Humanity does, Adam and Eve. But yet God searches for them, but they blame shift instead of taking ownership. So God justly gives them consequences. And that's the end of the story. Right? No. Thankfully, it's not the end of the story. This could have been the end of the story, right? It could have been. But 3:20, what's kind of the next section here?
He named his wife, because before she was just called the woman. He gave her the name Eve.
Yep. So what's significant about calling her Eve?
Mother of all living.
Yeah, remember, he was just told, you are going to die. And then he looks at his wife and goes, I'm going to call you Eve, the mother of the living. Doesn't that seem kind of strange? Unless maybe Adam believed the promise that the serpent would be defeated, that there would be a child to come and defeat the serpent, right? So death won't get the last word at the end of the day.
What do you make of the fact that Adam is standing right there?
Yeah.
Conversation.
Yeah, between him and Eve, right? Because, yeah, that's something we didn't point out. Yeah, because it's, it's not like, Eve was off by herself, she got tempted, and then she brought back an apple pie to Adam, and he's like, where'd you get the apple pie from? She's like, oh, it's special. Just eat it anyways, honey, right? Like, no, like Adam's right there with her. And he's totally passively just letting the play out. So he is 100% at fault. And it's interesting. Eve's the one that sinned first, but who does God come to talk to first? And back in verse 9, the Lord God called to the man and said to him, where are you? And he calls him to account first. I think because Adam had a leadership role in the relationship, and so God's coming to him and saying, this is on your watch, buddy. You let this happen, so I'm coming to you first. Which is why even when Paul talks about how sin enters the world, he doesn't say sin entered the world through Eve, he says sin entered the world through Adam, right? Because Adam totally failed to do his job. He should have told the snake to shut up and pound it to a pulp and sent it out of the garden, but he didn't. Yeah. So, all right, so verses 20 to where would we have this section end? Where did people have this section end?
I guess I took the next, 21, I would say, that's when God takes care of the nakedness issue.
Yeah, so the group in the back, would you guys agree, like 320 to 321? Or did you go a little further? 22?
I see 22 through 24 as a completely different discussion.
All right, so let me put up 21 and then 22 to 24. How would you summarize the 22 to 24 section then?
Expulsion.
So he expels them from the garden. So this is this idea of judgment, right, again? But then 320, 321, it's not judgment, but what? Passion. Compassion, thank you. Yes, that's the word. So you've got God providing for Adam and Eve, right? So this is like mercy. And think about it, right? Is he provides animal skins to cover them. You don't get animal skins without an animal dying. So you've got God provides a covering, you could say through sacrifice even. But then, even though it's happened, they're still expelled from the garden, right? And this is both judgment, but I also think it's a bit of mercy. Because just imagine a Hitler who is immortal, who could never die. The thing about death is while it's judgment on us, it's also mercy because death means that every human evil will one day reach an end. It cannot go on forever, right? So, all right, so here's kind of our structure. We see clearly the problem that lies in humanity, right? And this is really important because when people look at the broken world, people tend to be like, why did God make this world bad? And Genesis 3 is really clear that who is to blame for this? These two parties, not God, right? So how did you guys try to sum up the main point of the passage?
We said, the serpent deceives Adam and the woman. They disobey, and God punishes all of them and expels them from the garden.
Okay, let me jot down serpent deceives
Adam and the woman. Okay,
to disobey God.
okay.
Yep. Then what else?
God punishes all of them and expels them from the garden.
Okay. A&E is Adam and Eve, just for short. So, serpent deceives Adam and Eve to disobey God, who judges all of them and expels Adam and Eve from the garden. And obviously, being expelled from the garden means what? Like, what does it really mean to be expelled from the garden?
Separate from God.
Separate from God,
In the garden,
struggle, physical death, because there's no access to the tree of life anymore, right? So,
They can't, it says be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. They can't do that anymore
yep,
from Eden.
yep.
It's gonna be another winter.
Yep. Yep. Okay, so what about this group back here? Is there anything you'd add or tweak from this? Just looking at your guys' own sentence?
Well, yeah, I'll read you what I wrote.
Yep.
But I think maybe just the end thing is the tweak. But
Yep.
the importance of understanding good and evil. Disobedience leads to consequences which point to a need for redemption.
Yes, okay. So, yes. So, what you guys have at the end, I think, was missing here, right? Because you guys got Satan deceiving, Adam and Eve disobey, right? You've got God judging them. But this section here, this whole idea of kind of God being merciful, right? So, how did you phrase that again?
The whole thing or just?
No, just the last bit.
Disobedience leads to consequences which point to a need for redemption.
Yep. All right. But promises redemption here, I'll put. And then how exactly does he promise redemption? Like, what is the way of redemption that he's promising?
That the offspring will crush the head.
Yep. Through. Okay. If we wanted to tighten this up, we could scratch out this part here because it's kind of covered under the judges then, right? But does that seem like a decent main point here? The serpent deceives Adam and Eve to disobey God, who judges all of them, but promises redemption through a future child.
the one question that
Yep.
popped into my head is, he promises that the offspring of Eve will defeat, well,
Yep.
let's say defeat the offspring of the serpent.
Nope. That's actually really interesting. Defeat the serpent. Yep.
Serpent.
Yep.
Now, I'm not sure where the idea that redemption is mentioned there.
Right. So you're okay. That's interesting. Yeah. So why did you guys pick redemption?
Guess knowing what I know later on.
Yeah. so maybe reading a little of the future back in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, that's fair.
You
Yep.
read
Yep.
Christ into it,
Yep.
then you
Yep.
would say, okay,
Yep.
redemption fits there. But-
Yep.
But at this point,
Yep.
at this point in Scripture, that's not something that you would even think about,
Right. So
other than Satan's going to be defeated.
Yeah, I was gonna say that Satan's, that the part about striking the head, that's.
all right. So maybe we could just say, but promises a future child to defeat Satan. If we want to be a little tired of the passage. So not necessarily all of redemption's promised here, but there is a defeat of Satan, who's the great enemy, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how does this point us to Christ? How did you guys use kind of the acronym to point this to Christ?
Well, there's a command.
Yep, what's the command in the main point that you saw?
Commanding not to eat from the tree.
So we could see how like Jesus is the only one that perfectly obeyed, right? Like he's not like us who fell short. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
I would say as well, the very nature of the temptation
Yep. That's still kind of the same way that Satan works today, right? He gets us to doubt God. Yep, so there's kind of a pattern of how Satan works that continues today. Okay?
I think it's also the letter I for ill. Something has gone wrong.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
that's what the whole story is about. Something has gone
Yep.
wrong.
Something's gone terribly wrong, right? And so we need somebody to come and fix it, right? Yep. Are there any like types or recurring themes that show up here that kind of point us to Christ?
Well, Adam is a type.
Yeah, Adam's a type, right? So we need a better Adam, right? And that's what Paul talks about. Adam, Jesus is the better Adam that keeps the command, right? And we see that in the temptation in kind of the wilderness, for example, right? He doesn't disobey God when he's tempted by the serpent, right? So he isn't disobeyed. He isn't deceived and doesn't disobey, and yet he takes the judgment for us, right? Are there any other types here? How about the idea of being a covering through sacrifice? That kind of points us ahead to Jesus, right? So you get this idea that there's going to be a cost to the covering, right? Which points us ahead to Jesus. And then, obviously, do you guys all pick up the idea of promise? Hope, promise from this passage, right?
3:15.
Yeah? Mm-hmm. Yep. Right, that Jesus is the promised one that defeats the serpent, right? He's wounded in the process, right? Dies on the cross, yet he utterly defeats Satan, right? And he takes on our judgment for not taking the command, and he pays the cost necessary to provide a covering, right? So this just screams out pointing you to Jesus, right? What would happen if we took this passage and didn't think about Jesus at all? Let's just think about that for a second. How would you apply this passage if you didn't think about Jesus at all? We're in a mess, okay?
Well, you got people that have disobeyed God's command. They were punished for it and ejected.
Eject, okay, yep.
Story.
Yeah, yeah.
There's nothing. You say, well, look on the bright side. There is no bright side.
Yeah, yeah, you're right, yep. Sue, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I was thinking just focuses on like the fall part of it and not.
Yeah,
getting back
there's
up.
no hope, yeah. Yeah, so really kind of the only application you're left with is, hey, bad news, we're toast. Or, hey, you better not sin. You better avoid all the temptations. In fact, let me teach you 7 tips on how to avoid temptation so you won't fall into temptation. Now, those might be good tips, but it's going to put all the emphasis on you trying hard not to disobey. And we're going to miss that actually us disobeying is like just par for the course, unfortunately. The real point of this passage is that yes, we've disobeyed, but God. And if we miss how this points us to Jesus and the but God, there's no transformation, right? Just trying hard or giving up in despair isn't going to lead to transformation. But when I can read this passage and go, wow, I'm just like Adam and Eve. I so often doubt God's word. I fall into sin, and yet God comes looking for me. And he did so while I was a sinner at just the right time. And he took the curse of sin upon himself. He did battle with Satan. He embraced death for me so that I can have life and forgiveness, my shame washed away, set free. Wow. Because if at the heart of temptation is doubting God, what better thing to help transform us that we don't doubt God than being reminded of how much God loves us in Jesus, right? Isn't that what's going to help us fight doubts that we don't want to sin? It's not going to be our own effort. It's going to be coming back to how this points us to Christ. So we can learn about how Satan tempts us, but if we don't have the Christ connection, we're probably just going to stop there and just end up in despair. And so that's, again, why we need to always see how does this point us to Jesus, right? So, All right, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll look at chapter 4.